Okay, so let's talk about kind of the, you know, the general, you know, the general uh, let's talk about the general development of the school, as if we're trying to break it up into phases. So one is the making of a madhab. Okay, this is I call it the hadith phase. This is an Imam Ahmed's study, his travels. He's gathering all of the hadith. He's narrating them. He's asking his teachers for their opinions and what can be derived from these hadith. And so that this is kind of this is where al-madhhab tabalawar, right? This is where the madhab kind of like started to coalesce. Then there's the riwayah phase, and this is the phase of Ahmed's students asking him questions. Oh, you said this, what about that? You said that, what about this? This continues until you get to Abu Bakr Khalal in 311, who kind of consolidates. He looks at all of these students of Imam Ahmed, right? And he starts consolidating all of their opinions into Jami' al-Riwayat. And he tries to collect all, you know, like we said, that was done in the Mudawwana, right? Like we said, that was kind of done in, you know, in some of the books of the other madhahib. He kind of gathers all of these opinions in this book. And then that later on is summarized, like Ghulam al-Khalal in Zad al-Musafir, and others. We'll talk about that book later. And then later on, this consolidation phase. So let's take all of these students and what they said, consolidate it into one area. Look at what was the same, what was different. Then we get to the establishment phase. This is where Al-Khiraqi in 334, he says, well, Al-Muzani took the Ummah of Shafi'i and he wrote Al-Mukhtasar. So I'm going to take the works of Ahmed and I'm going to write a Mukhtasar like that. And so now you get Mukhtasar al-Khiraqi. So Mukhtasar al-Khiraqi is the first Mukhtasar in the Madhhab. It's the most famous. It has the most, well, maybe, yeah. It has a number of explanations on it. And so this was the establishment phase. This is now let's say, well, this is the official opinion. Well, how do we know it's the official opinion? Well, because we have, 9 out of 10 students of Ahmed. I'm just making that number up, but 9 out of 10 students of Ahmed saying that this was what his opinion was, right? How do we judge what the opinion was? Is it because of the sheer number? Was it because of what came later or earlier? We'll talk about that later. You have Abu Ya'la, similar, and others who continued this idea of the establishment phase of kind of now we're getting away from simply just narrating that the Imam said this and this is what it means, to this is what the Imam and all of these companions of his said, and this is what they took from that. Until we get to 620, where we get to Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, and this is what I call the first codification phase, where Ibn Qudama and Majd ibn Taymiyyah were kind of they become the official madhab. And of course, that's another thing we'll talk about, when we talk about what's authoritative and who's an authority, what people go, this isn't the al-mu'tamad min al-madhhab. This isn't the established opinion of the madhhab. Well, established opinion of the madhhab in which phase of the madhhab? So the madhhab is not like, oh, I found this book of the madhhab and this is what it says, and everybody who doesn't do this is wrong. No, that's not how it works. It is a kind of a living, breathing organism almost. And so Ibn Qudama in his time, he presented what he believed the madhhab to be. Before that, if you had what was it, Abu Ya'la and Ibn Hamid agreeing that it was considered the madhhab. Don't quote me on that because we'll do it in a couple later slides. And then we get to this reinvigoration phase, and this is where we get Ahmed ibn Abd al-Halim ibn Taymiyyah, so the grandson of Majd al-Din ibn Taymiyyah, considered one of the greatest scholars of the Hanbali Madhhab. And anybody who tells you that Ibn Taymiyyah was not considered a Hanbali or was not considered in the Madhhab has very little reading in the Madhhab. And even those who disagreed with him in certain ideological issues still considered him to be a scholar in the legal sphere. And they consider him a scholar in the ideological sphere, but maybe they didn't agree with him. But the point is this reinvigoration phase is because of the kind of the strength of Ibn Taymiyyah and his arguments, and the number of students that he had. You had a number of people that kind of came out of that school. And so, you had Ibn Abd al-Hadi, and you had Ibn Rajab, and you had others, right? And then later, until we get around the year 1051, this is where Mansur al-Bahuti it kind of codifies the madhab again, and this is what becomes the time of the Mutaakhirin, or the later Hanabila. And then I call this the solidification phase, and this is where you get to like 1206, where you have Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab in Arabia, you have Al-Ruhaybani in Egypt, Shatti and others in Shatti in Iraq or in Lebanon, and this is where they're kind of solidifying what the madhab is. And so most of the kind of the tent poles of the madhab have already been stuck into the ground, and the tent is erected and people are staying in it. Now they're kind of figuring out, well, how do we tie this here, and where do we put up a light at, right? Ruhaybani I find particularly fascinating, because in his book Matalib ul-Nuha, he's kind of at the cusp of modernity with dealing with issues that were coming to because of modernization and trade and things like that. So really interesting stuff. We'll talk more about that later. Yeah. Okay, and that's it exactly for the slides today. I'll be happy to take some questions here. So we're streaming on StreamYard, so we get questions coming in from Facebook and from YouTube. So wa alaikum salam to everyone. Said salam, because salam is an amana, and I'm happy that you're able to join. Once someone asks, let's see, there is a narrative I often find amongst Orientalist and Western authors that historically Hanbalis have been more prone to intolerance than other madhahib. Do you think that this is accurate or exaggerated? I think this is exaggerated. I do not think it's accurate. I think what they're basing their opinion on is particularly one phase of history in Baghdad when Hanbalis had kind of a modicum of political power, and I believe that was under Al-Qadir and of the Abbasids, and there was kind of the back and forth between Ibn Jarir al-Tabari and others. But I don't believe that this is something that's normative of the madhab. And I believe that anybody who wants to test the waters should simply go to Ahkam Ahl al-Dhimma, as narrated from Al-Imam Ahmad, and read it. And you'll find that he is actually, in dealing with others, dealing with other faiths and other peoples and other things like that, he is much more lenient than the other madhahib. In fact, I would say that the Hanbali madhab is probably the most lenient of the four madhahib in the area of mu'amalat, in the area of socialization, and in other areas. But it's that one particular period of history where there was political strife and thus social strife that has been kind of ported onto the rest of the history of the madhab. And then let's face it as well, if you approach the Islamic tradition, and this is a general critique of Orientalist and Western authors. If you approach the Islamic tradition as being as being held in disregard and being skeptical of it, with the preconceived and very fideistic notion that because we have variant opinions on ideological and legal and social issues, the fact that there was a minority that held those opinions, that means that they were actually the truth, and the majority were simply trying to force an opinion that served their own political interests. So there's many times this attitude of like, well, the Mu'tazila were just so embattled because they were actually they actually had real Islam, and everybody who fought against them was status quo, and they were simply trying to relate and keep things safe and secure. The Rafila, they're the ones who had real Islam, and everyone else who was not with who was saying Abu Bakr and Umar, and and there no one controls creation except Allah, and there's no hidden imam and all that. No, they're the ones that are actually not telling you the truth, because these people who are embattled and holding deviant beliefs are willing to be embattled for that, which means that there's some truth to them. So there's this weird approach towards the and this is not all Orientalists or all Western authors. I don't think that generalizations are helpful, and I think that actually there's a generation of authors who are lean less on those fideistic ideas and are much more data based, and much more kind of just plain historians of relating what was. But let's not put it past, let's not be inaccurate or let's not fool ourselves that there are some people who have kind of an axe to grind, right? So I don't believe that the Hanbali school is intolerant. Since the Madhhab is a living entity, what would it take for there to be a newly established Mu'tamid position for our era? That's a good question. I've never even thought of that, so I don't think I would even be able to answer that. But it certainly is. It certainly is interesting to say the least. All right, everybody. I am going to peace out for the night because, as you can tell, I'm kind of shutting down. But inshallah ta'ala, 9:30, 9:45-ish. I'll try and be on by 9:30, 9:35. The issue is with Salat al-Isha, right? So hopefully by 9:30, 9:45 tomorrow, we'll be back here for session 2, inshallah ta'ala. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.